Hey everybody, I am back, and today we are going to be reading Chapter 8 of The Secret Garden. Alright, Chapter 8 The Robin Who Showed the Way. She looked at the key quite a long time. She turned it over and thought about it. As I have said before, she was not a child who had been trained to ask permission to consult her elders about things. All she thought about the key was that if it was the key to the closed garden, and could she find out where the door was, she could perhaps open it and see what was inside the walls and what had happened to the old rose trees. It was because it had been shut up so long that she wanted to see it. It seemed as if it must be different from other places, and that something strange must have happened to it during the 10 years. Besides that, if she liked it, she could go into it every day and shut the door behind her, and she could make up some play of her own and play it quite alone, because nobody would ever know where she was, but would think the door was still locked and the key buried in the earth. The thought of that pleased her very much. Living, as it were, all by herself in a house with 100 mysteriously closed rooms and having nothing whatever to do to amuse herself, had set her inactive brain to working, and was actually awakening her imagination. There is no doubt that the fresh, strong, pure air from the moor had a great deal to do with it, just as it had given her an appetite, and fighting with the wind had stirred her blood, so the same things had stirred her mind. In India she had always been too hot and languid and weak to care much about anything, but in this place she was beginning to care, and to want to do new things. Already she was less contrary, though she did not know why. She put the key in her pocket and walked up and down her walk. No one but herself ever seemed to come there, so she could walk slowly and look at the wall, or rather at the ivy growing on it. The ivy was the baffling thing. However carefully she looked, she could see nothing but thickly growing, glossy, dark green leaves. She was very much disappointed. Something of her contrariness came back to her as she paced the walk and looked over it at the treetops inside. It seemed so silly, she said to herself, to be near it and not be able to get in. She took the key in her pocket when she went back to the house, and she made up her mind that she would always carry it with her when she went out, so that if she ever should find the hidden door, she would be ready. Mrs. Medlock had allowed Martha to sleep all night at the cottage, but she was back at her work in the morning with cheeks redder than ever and in the best of spirits. "I got up at 4 o'clock, she said. "It was pretty on the moor with the birds getting up and the rabbits scampering about and the sun arising. I didn't walk all the way. A man gave me a ride in his cart, and I did enjoy myself." She was full of stories of the delights of her day out. Her mother had been glad to see her, and they had got the baking and washing all out of the way. She had even made each of the children a dough cake with a bit of brown sugar in it. "I had 'em all piping hot when they came in from playing on the moor, and the cottage, it smelled nice, clean hot bacon, and there was a good fire, and they just shouted for joy. Our Dickens said our cottage was good enough for a king." In the evening they had all sat around the fire, and Martha and her mother had sewed patches on torn clothes and mended stockings, and Martha had told them about the little girl who had come from India and who had been waited on all her life by what Martha called blacks, until she didn't know how to put on her own stockings. "They did like to hear about you," said Martha. "They wanted to know all about the others and the ship you came on, and I couldn't tell them enough." Mary reflected a little. "I'll tell you a great deal more before your next day out," she said, "so that you will have more to talk about. I dare say they would like to hear about riding on elephants and camels, and about the officers going to hunt tigers." "My word!" cried delighted Martha. "It would set 'em clean off their heads. Would they really do that, miss? It would be the same as a wild beast show like we had heard in York once." "India is quite different from Yorkshire," Mary said slowly, as she thought the matter over. "I never thought of that. Did Dickon and your mother like to hear you talk about me?" Why, our Dickon's eyes nearly started out of his head, they got so round, answered Martha. But mother, she was put out about your seeming to be all by yourself, like. She said, hasn't Mr. Craven got no governess for her, nor no nurse? And I said, no, he hasn't, though Mrs. Medlock says he will when he thinks of it, but she says he might not think of it for 2 or 3 years. I don't want a governess, said Mary sharply. But mother says you ought to be learning your book by this time, and you ought to have a woman to look after you, and she says, now, Martha, you just think how you'd feel yourself in a big place like that, wandering about all alone and no mother. You do your best to cheer her up, she says, and I said I would. Mary gave her a long, steady look. You do cheer me up, she said. I like to hear you talk. Presently, Martha went out of the room and came back with something held in her hands under her apron. What dost thou think, she said with a cheerful grin, I brought thee a present. A present? Exclaimed Mistress Mary. How could a cottage full of 14 hungry people give anyone a present? A man was driving across the moor peddling, Martha explained. And he stopped his cart at our door, and he had pots and pans and odds and ends, but mother had no money to buy anything. Just as he was going away, our Elizabeth Ellen called out, Mother, he's got a skipping ropes, a red and blue handles. And mother, she calls out quite a sudden, Here, stop, mister! How much are they? And he says, 2pence. And mother, she began fumbling in her pocket, and she says to me, Martha, they's brought me thy wages like a good lass, and I've got 4 places to put every penny. But I'm just going to take 2pence out of it to buy that poor child's skipping rope. I have to turn the page, sorry. And she bought one, and here it is. She brought it out from under her apron and exhibited it quite proudly. It was a strong, slender rope with a striped red and blue handle at each end, but Mary Lennox had never seen a skipping rope before. She gazed at it with a mystified expression. What is it for? She asked curiously. For? Cried Martha. Does that mean they've got no skipping ropes in India, for all they've got elephants and tigers and camels? No wonder most of 'em's other. This is what it's for. Just watch me. And she ran into the middle of the room, and taking a handle in each hand, began to skip and skip and skip, while Mary turned in her chair to stare at her, and the strange faces in the old portraits seemed to stare at her too, and wonder what on earth this common little cottager had the impudence to be doing under their very noses. But Martha did not even see them. The interest and curiosity in Mistress Mary's face delighted her, and she went on skipping and counted as she skipped until she had reached 100. I could skip longer than that, she said when she stopped. I've skipped as much as 500 when I was 12, but I wasn't as fat then as I am now, and I was in practice. Mary got up from her chair, beginning to feel excited herself. It looks nice, she said. Your mother is a kind woman. Do you think I could ever skip like that? You just try it, urged Martha, handing her the skipping rope. You can't skip to 100 at first, but if you practice, you'll mount up. That's what mother said. She says nothings will do her more as good skipping rope. It's the sensiblest toy a child can have. Let her play out in the fresh air skipping, and it'll stretch her legs and arms and give her some strength in 'em. It was plain that there was not a great deal of strength in Mistress Mary's arms and legs when she first began to skip. She was not very clever at it, but she liked it so much that she did not want to stop. Put on the things and run and skip out of doors, said Martha. Mother said I must tell you to keep out of doors as much as you could, even when it rains a bit, so as thou wrap up warm. And I'm going to pause now because chapter 8 is rather long, so I will continue in the next video.